Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up and feeling refreshed and ready to begin this new day. Today is Thursday, December 18th, and we get another opportunity to spend it together. Can you believe that a week from today is Christmas? I know, it's crazy. December the 18th, we have one more week. A lot of stuff going on. Currently, we are in the midst of a series now called Mary's Voice. It's an Advent series that we have been looking at. And if you'd like more information on the sermons or just resources for that study, you could just get onto our BethanyChurch.com website and you'll find it all there. Also, there's the times for all of our Christmas Eve services. So invite you to be a part of that. The services on our Greenland campus are going to be at 3 in the afternoon, at 5, and at 8. And then we will also be having services at 3 and 5 in Raymond, and at 5 o'clock in Kittery. So there are a number of options for you and your family, and we trust that you guys will take advantage of that. It's so great when the family of God just gathers together. There's power in those numbers. Just as a witness to tell people that God is doing something in our midst. So I hope that you will avail yourself of that. This is week 3, and we're looking at Mary's song. This is a song that's listed for us in Luke chapter 1, 39 through 55. We have begun already to take a good look at this passage. We saw a note of joy that existed throughout this passage. And it just strikes you because so much of Mary's world is going to be upside down. There are going to be things that are going to happen that are going to take Mary, her life is just going to go into a completely different direction. A rich one, no doubt. Like, she's going to see things and experience things that many of us can only dream about. But there's also going to be some real challenges and some hardships that are there. And yet, when she is confronted with the news of God, her reaction is to question, like all of us. And when God gives her an answer, her response is one of a sweet surrender. She says, "May it be to me as you have said." And then she goes on in this beautiful, piece of poetry to just express why she feels this way, because she has a big picture of God, and that has been what we find here in this passage. Now, as we look, right, there is this great reversal that takes place, and we started looking at those things. Ways in which God enters into our circumstances, and he makes things completely different. And so what I'd like to do is continue this with you this morning as we look at a couple of passages. And then we're going to take a little diversion in that we're going to look at a couple of other passages this morning. So when we start talking about this reversal, in verse 50 of Luke 1, she says this: "His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation." And we took a look at this and recognized this mercy that is being extended to all of those who know him throughout the generations is an indication of God's redemption, the forgiveness of sins. God's grace is on full display here. And we talked a little bit as a challenge to say, listen, if we receive this grace, God is asking us to demonstrate that grace towards others. Well, Luke, verse 51, she has another one of these reversals that she wants to bring to our attention. And that is, it says here, it says, he has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. God is the one who's going to repay the injustices around us. God is, omnipotent enough, right? Strong enough that he can thwart the most clever of men. And so we're being asked to leave this to him, because otherwise I'm going to be tempted to return evil for evil. But there are a number of ways in which we have seen that in our day, right? That God performs mighty deeds on our behalf, and he scatters the proud in their inmost thoughts. Like God is the one who can come and come alongside and just bring down scatter even the most proud, those who think they got it all together. Well, along that train of thought, then, what I'd like for you to do is I would like for you to think a little bit more with me in this passage here that you're going to see is here. I'm sorry. There's a banner that I want to show you, but it's not letting me do this. So here, let me see if I can pull this up. And yeah, I gotcha. Here we go. All right. So what I'd like to do is for you to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and then we're going to go to the book of Numbers, which is an Old Testament book. So if you have your Bibles open, you can turn to 1 Corinthians 10, and then also take a look at this Old Testament book of Numbers. And I'm going to show you why I'm doing that this morning, because what I want to do is I want to take that idea of God scattering the proud, right? That God is his arm is strong enough, right? He says he has performed mighty deeds with his arm, scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. So I thought I would give you some other teaching that kind of brings this out. I had some friends who were iron workers, and it was amazing to me how these guys would climb and be so high up off the ground working. One of my friends, when I was living in New York, he used to work. He was in the Ironworkers Union, and he would work above the ceiling of Madison Square Garden. He told me above the ceiling of the garden that there were these series of catwalks, and they were hidden from public view, high above the ceiling. And he shared that as he would work his way through this maze of walkways, as he went about his job, he had to constantly remind himself that the floor beneath him, which was really the ceiling of Madison Square Garden, was offering a deceptive sense of security. See, the floor beneath him would offer little support to his weight, and the result would be surely death. And I thought, boy, what a great illustration that was of how there are some very deceptive foundations of security that we lean on. Think about it. Sometimes people, notoriety, fame, right? But that could be taken away. Think about how, especially in our day, right, when people were, in this cancel culture, one thing comes out and all of a sudden the person who was in such great favor, now not so much. You become popular, and you can become not so popular. You could have a lot, and in a moment it could be taken away. I mean, just again, we lived through COVID, right? We could see how circumstances absolutely beyond our control. So spiritually, there exists many deceptive foundations of security. And we live in a day and an age where it remains a challenge to hear and see a visible witness for the ways of God. there are a myriad of voices that are competing for one's attention, right? And it drowns out the call, sometimes I think, of God in our life, a call for a relationship that should be based on truth. And what is too often promoted is a watered down version of commitment. We find ourselves holding to a form of religion, excuse me, that contains little power. So this week, I wanted to take you through some passages in the book of Numbers so that we would get a little bit more of an understanding. But I first want you to take a moment and we're going to turn there in a moment. But first, I'm going to read a passage from 1 Corinthians 10. But when we get to Numbers, you'll see that the first 10 chapters, we read about how diligent the people of God were in fulfilling Moses' directives with regard to how they were to consecrate themselves, the tabernacle, all the celebrations. The book of Numbers reminds us of supernatural experiences that people of Israel enjoyed, experiences that revealed their special standing as a people, with whom God had established this covenant. There are a number of these kinds of experiences, right? The crossing of the Red Sea, God's guidance by a cloud or a pillar of fire at night. How about giving them manna and meat, quail in the desert, water from a rock? See, all of these things, they just showed God's mighty power. And there is a deceptively enticing point of view that is often, I think, promoted, which lulls us into a false sense of security. And what do I mean by that? There is a belief that promises blessing by simple participation in religious activity. So, like I do X amount of things, spiritual-minded things, and somehow or another that ought to mean like my life is going to be smooth. So, what we make a profession of faith that does not evidence itself in a devotion to the one we profess to follow. So we get baptized, we become members, we even do things like pray. But if our prayers are not informed by the truth of God's word, if the one to whom we're praying is not reflecting the one who has revealed himself in the scripture, then don't you see, I could be praying to the God of my own imagination. And no, Paul is asking us to reflect on the very experiences that I just mentioned to you, right? Those crossing of the sea, the pillar of fire, all these great miracles. Paul, the Apostle Paul, in 1 Corinthians 10, is about to tell people, listen, just because you participated in these things doesn't mean that you've quite arrived spiritually. So let me take a look at this, and then we're going to go and we're going to look at some particular incidences here in the book of Numbers. So 1 Corinthians 10, start at verse 1. He says, I don't want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. See, these are references, right? Under the cloud is that this cloud that God moved it when supernaturally his presence was felt when they came up out of Egypt, right? And the scriptures say that there was a pillar of fire, a cloud by day and fire by night that would move the people of Israel. What that looked like, I don't know. We could just use our imagination, but all I know is that these people every day would wake up and visibly see a sign of God's presence. And it says, and they all passed through the sea, a reference again to God's deliverance through the Red Sea. And he says they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food, which was what? Manna from heaven, right? They all drank the same spiritual drink, the water that God brought forth from a rock. And what Paul is saying here is they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them. And that rock was Messiah. That rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them their bodies were scattered over the desert. So you see what I'm saying? Like the participation, they lived through these great times. They were eating the manna, they were drinking the water that came from a rock. And instead of recognizing all of these, all this phenomena came from a God who was making himself known to them so that they would follow him by faith, it didn't change their heart. Their participation in these experiences did not necessarily translate into blessing. In fact, Paul emphasizes that despite their participation, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Isn't that what it says in verse 5? So what follows then in the book of Numbers is the reality that the Israelite circle of rebelliousness affected everybody in the community, including Moses. And the warning from their history is to guard our hearts. So look here. It says, once again, Paul goes on to recall some of their experiences. So here in verse 6, he says, now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. So here we have a warning from history. See, that's the best way to use our scriptures, is to allow them to inform our present behaviors. I go back and see how God dealt with the people long ago. Rest assured, God doesn't change. God was this way, and he's going to be the same yesterday, today, and forever. So here in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul is giving them a history lesson to the people who are living in the days following the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, right? So they're separated by centuries and centuries. But Paul doesn't say, well, that happened a long time ago. This is an old book. We're living in 60 AD right now. Yeah, he doesn't do that. He's saying, look, I want to recall these experiences. So what does he say in verse 6? He says, these things happened as examples to keep us from setting our heart on evil things as they did. Don't be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day, 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by destroying angels. Do you see here? It's saying that we are not to do as some of them did. And look at verse 7. He talks about the idolaters. He talks about those who committed sexual immorality, where 23,000 of them died. Wait, he says, you shouldn't test the Lord, as some of them did, killed by snakes. See, all of these, they are referencing Old Testament, examples here. So I'd like to do is give you just one. We know all about, don't be idolaters, as some of them were. People sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry, right? Verse 7. That's a reference to the building of the golden calf. And if you go back, you'll see that in Exodus chapter 32. This is the reference to that event. It says, don't be like them. Here, God just had rescued them out of Egypt, and they're building a golden calf. Go figure. But you know what? It's not just them. How many times has God done things in our life, and we are moved to be so thankful? God, thank you so much for this. And then our hearts are so fickle. A month later, we're off to the next thing, and sometimes we could just completely forget Him. So, see, these four examples illustrate more specific ways in which God is saying, look, I want you to learn from their poor example and do the right things, which is going back again, just so we don't lose the main theme here, right? Luke chapter 1, verse 51, when we're told here in this passage, right? He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. So here we are looking at how God is doing that. He demonstrated his disapproval right? So I'm just going to take you to one of those, right? And it's found here in the book of Numbers. So here is this idea of the grumbling and murmurings of the people, right? So when in First Corinthians he says, "Do not grumble as some of them did," verse 10 of First Corinthians 10. Let me show you what I think what Paul is referring to here. It's a passage in Numbers chapter 11. So why don't you turn there with me to Numbers 11, and we'll finish our time out this morning looking at this passage. It says here, the rabble with them began to crave other food. So this is the rabble are referring to the people who had come out with the nation of Israel. They weren't the faithful ones. They were the ones who saw what was happening, and they're like, man, I'm going to get on that train. And so they get on the train, and now they find themselves wandering around in this wilderness, which, by the way, was never God's intention. And why do I say that? Well, you know the answer to that. God brought them out of Egypt to do what? To bring them into the promised land. But they refused to go. They refused to engage. And the consequence of that is now they are wandering around in the desert for nearly 40 years. So they're wandering around in the desert. It's not God's fault. It's theirs. God brought them out of Egypt with signs and wonders that should have been enough to say, I got your back. And if I tell you that I guarantee your success in this land, if you do these things, why wouldn't you do them? God already has showed himself to be trustworthy. But, man, this sin that just is so pervasive in our life, isn't it sometimes so disheartening? The things that you know to do, you don't, and the things you shouldn't do, those you do. This is part of our sanctification, right? It's about weaning ourselves from this world and beginning to put more and more of our mind on the things of God. And it doesn't always come so easy. But notice here in Numbers chapter 11, this is the example that Paul is using in 1 Corinthians 10. He says, the rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and garlic. But now we've lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. So the rabble, it appears, are those who went out with the nation of Israel. And the rabble are stirring things up. Is that not like how you could have Christians and then they're in the world and the world is beginning to influence the Christians? Saying, come on, like, what are you doing? Where's this God? And it put all this doubt in your head. And isn't that the same thing that happened in the Garden of Eden with the serpent and Adam and Eve? Come on, this is the common theme that's throughout our Bible. There's always this voice that's contrary, always trying to get us to move in another direction. But so when they say here, oh man, we go back, we remember what it was like in Egypt. Yeah, they're eating manna because they refused to go into the promised land, not because God was holding out on them. And now they're going back and reminiscing, but they're only reminiscing the good parts. So when they say all this stuff was at no cost, it wasn't so for the Israelites. It may have been at no cost for the rabble, those Egyptians who left Egypt with the deliverance of Israel. But how free were the Israelites under their taskmasters' whips? How free were they when they suffered under the long, hard hours of forced labor? How free were they when their hearts and souls languished under their oppressors? Obviously, the only thing they were free to forget. And while understandable, we remember Moses, his words here. So he goes on to tell them in verse 10, Moses heard the people of every family wailing, each at their entrance to his tent. And the Lord became exceedingly angry. And Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their forefathers? Where am I supposed to get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, give us meat to eat. I cannot carry out all this by myself. The burden's too heavy. If this is how you're going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I found favor in your eyes, do not let me face my own ruin. Yeah, of course. Do you really think that God is going to place all of this burden on Moses and hold him responsible? The only thing God is going to hold Moses responsible for is to make sure that you represent me well before the people. Wasn't that part of the covenant? Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain, which means don't misrepresent me. Don't portray me differently than the way in which I portray myself in the scripture. Is that any different than when Jesus said to his disciples who came to him and said, Lord, you got to send these people away because who has food to feed them? And Jesus says to him, you give them food. And the text tells us that Jesus already had determined that he was going to feed them. But it was just to show, are you resting on your strength, on your provision, or are you going to rest on his? Because this whole life of faith is one in which we have to depend on him. And so consequently, God sets Moses straight. Look at verses 23 on. He says, the Lord answered Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? You will now see whether or not you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you. And this is this grumbling that takes place. See, the circumstances that tempt us to sin are never that different from those of which God's people of every era have experienced and will experience. And we never have to give in to them. There is always an escape in whatever difficult situations we find ourselves. We never have to give in to these temptations. No one makes us sin. We sin because our hearts are drawn away. Certain factors may generate greater temptations for some individuals than others, true enough. But ultimately, we are accountable for our own choices. And for believers, one of those choices remains to accept God's escape. Our culture, there's a passage that you find in verse 13 of 1 Corinthians 10, to just go back again. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it says, no temptation has seized you except which is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. See, our culture would rewrite the end of this verse. So the verse says, when you're tempted, he will provide a way out so that you could stand up under it. But our culture would write, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you don't have to stand up under it. But that's, of course, is the opposite of what God actually says here. God says, no, you lean into me and I'll give you the strength you need to bear this. Not lean into me and I'll make sure it doesn't happen. Why? Because we live in a fallen world. This world is not yet fully redeemed. Those kinds of promises Jesus is not making until the end of the age when all things are going to be made new. So that means you and I are going to be facing all kinds of trials in this life. Sickness, death, economic, strains, rebellious children, marriages that sometimes go upside down. Like there's 1,001 things that could go wrong in this world. God is saying, keep your eyes on me because I am the hope of the world. I'm the one who's going to give you peace. My spirit in you will produce the very fruit of those kinds of virtues that you are longing for. Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, kindness, self-control. All of these things, God says, I want to produce in you, despite the circumstances that are out there. God is faithful, and the way out is based on faithfulness. We simply have to take him at his word. And my friends, some things like that never change. So in this season, God is bringing us Jesus as a full demonstration that he has not forgotten the world and his promise to redeem it. He never forgets you and me. He is faithful and will not try us beyond what we're able to bear. But with every trial, he'll provide a way of escape. And that way of escape is Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. My friends, thank you so much for joining me today on this Thursday, December the 18th. Go out, seize the day, and never forget that God is good all the time. God bless you, my friends. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, Lord willing.